Dear NEBOSH students, if you're watching this video, it's probably because you have failed your NG2 or your IG2 practical project. In which case, let me explain what you have to do in order to pass on your next submission. So, you're not alone if you failed. Around about 40% of all NG2 submissions fail. This assessment is harder than the exam. The exam pass rate is usually around about 70 to 75%, which means three-quarters, nearly two-thirds to three-quarters of people pass. The NG2, it's about 40% fail. It's just over half of people actually pass it. So you've had your results, you've failed, or you've been referred, as NEBOSH say, and your course provider has sent you some feedback. Your feedback looks a bit like this. You'll have your learner number, your assessment, and you've got all the marking criteria. So this is what the examiner has to mark you against. We have some criteria, and you'll see a series of METs, hopefully lots of METs. That would be ideal. And then occasionally you might see a not met. You might have just one not met in the whole thing, which means that one little bit of criteria, that one thing, caused you to be referred or fail your NG2. Now, how does this work? Well, when an examiner receives an NG2 resubmission, they know it's a resubmission. They know it's on the system. It's like this is a first-time attempt or it's a resubmission. They know. The rules are for examiners that they are not allowed to remark any of the criteria which have previously been met. If you've met it, according to one examiner, that the second examiner isn't allowed to go back and change it. Now, this used to happen actually when NEBOSH first released the NG2s, for about a year or two, that this was happening. People would resubmit and then they'd end up failing on criteria they'd previously met. And it was very frustrating for the students, for the examiners, and for NEBOSH. Recently, this has been cleared up. The rules have changed. If you have met some criteria, that's it. You've met it. It can't be changed by a new examiner, not without bloody good reason. So the standard rule is we don't even look at it. The examiners don't even look at it. So in this case here, what we can see is the student has met everything in the description of the organization. So we've got lots of mets here. What does that mean? It means that when they resubmit their NG2, they don't have to change anything in the description. They can just leave it. The methodology, description of the organization, the activities, leave it. Don't touch it. Because if you touch it, then in theory, it could get remarked. Don't touch it. This student, when we look at part 2, risk assessment, we see a not met and it says minimum of 10 hazards. Okay, so we didn't have 10 hazards. Whoopsie. The hazards covered the categories, all 5 hazard categories, fantastic. And we've got a not met on each column of the table has not been completed. Whoopsie. But the action plan with justification, it's all met, fantastic. Part 3, it's all done. So that massive report you have to write with your 3 actions, done. Don't have to worry about that. And that little bit at the end, part 4, it's all met. So it's fantastic, isn't it? We don't have to change the introduction. We don't have to change the action plan. We don't have to change the part 4 bit at the end. It's just a risk assessment. So what do we do now? Let's look at the examiner comments to see why the criteria weren't met. Now, some examiners are better than others. Some examiners are pretty clear. This one's pretty clear, thankfully. It says the candidate included 9 markable hazards, 10 hazards covering 5 hazard categories. Right, so we've got 9 markable hazards. Right. The second height hazard was deemed the same issue as the previous one. So this was not 10 different hazards. Right, I see. So what the examiner is saying is that we've got 2 working at height hazards, both of which are so similar as far as the examiner was concerned, they are the same thing. And so it's like you've duplicated your own hazards. You've kind of like taken one hazard and made it 2, and that makes the whole thing 10 hazards. And the examiner's like, nah, I'm not falling for that. That's 1 hazard. Try harder next time. So what this student has to do is that they're going to have to add on an additional hazard in there. They could leave those 2 work at height hazards alone. Might be a good idea. Just don't touch it. Just leave them alone. But then add an 11th hazard, which is different to all of the others. What else does it say? It says not all sections of the risk assessment were suitable and sufficient as the first height hazard noted severe injuries, which was too generic, when it should have been the specific injuries, such as broken bones, fractures, amputations, etc. Okay, so what that means is in the how people might be harmed bit, they've only written down, oh, someone could fall and suffer severe injuries. Like, yeah, that's not specific enough. You don't have to write anything too complicated. The person could fall and suffer broken bones, fractures, could even die. It's just be a little bit more specific with the injuries. If you had a vibration hazard, you wouldn't just write down the person could suffer disease as a result of vibration. No, you'd write down vibration white finger. If someone suffered if someone was doing manual handling and suffered a manual handling injury, you wouldn't just write down manual handling injury. You could say they could cut their hands, they could get splinters, they could slip a disc, get a back injury. You'd be a little bit more specific, wouldn't you? So this is about being too vague. The movement of people and vehicle hazards also noted severe injuries instead of stating the specific injuries likely to be faced. This was too generic and not suitable and sufficient. Okay, so they made the same mistake there. So when resubmitting, there are basically two things that this candidate has to do. They're going to have to add on an additional hazard, which is not work at height and it's different to all of the others. That should give them 10 markable hazards. And then they should go through all of their hazards down that how people might be harmed column, and where it says severe injuries, they should add some additional detail like broken bones, fractures, amputations, whatever is relevant and suitable for that particular hazard. They should avoid touching anything else. They should avoid touching the introduction, the actions, the review bit at the end. Don't touch any of that. Just change the bits where you didn't meet the criteria, resubmit that to your course provider, who will then put it onto the NEBOSH system. And hopefully when the examiner gets it, they will see the criteria which you didn't meet and they will go straight to that. Chances are they'll look straight at the examiner's feedback to see what was wrong with this, and they will zero in on the bit where you failed and they'll check that you fixed it. And as long as you fixed it to their satisfaction, hopefully you'll get the pass grade that you have worked so hard for. Anyway, please, if this found this useful, please connect with me on LinkedIn. My name is Will Taylor. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, you know the drill, and I'll see you next time.